Now there's all kinds of different people in this world. There's only one high.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the inaugural episode of the Team Made Apart podcast, the podcast designed to teach those who work remotely and those who hire them how to work better together. I'm your host, Ryan Rogar. Before we get started, as always, today's show is brought to you by TeamMadeApart.com. Team Made Apart features articles, tools, and resources designed to teach remote workers and those who hire them how to work better together. A community for owners, managers, leaders, freelancers, contractors, and all variety of remote worker, Team Made Apart is also a terrific resource for companies interested in implementing remote work policies in otherwise co-located environments, or for those planning to build fully distributed organizations from the jump. Listeners of this podcast have an exciting opportunity to get involved in the remote work revolution. In light of current events related to the coronavirus pandemic and a sudden worldwide shift to remote work, we're offering a free remote work best practices guide for leaders who find themselves struggling to create a remote work policy in a pinch. Now, and for the duration of the crisis, visit teammadeapart.com/crisis to not only download your free Team Made Apart Remote Policy Primer, how to write remote work policies that don't suck, but to find other tools and resources to help you weather the storm. Great working relationships make for great remote work experiences, and with this free guide, you'll be better equipped to do your part in creating and maintaining a happy and sustainable remote life. Once again, to take advantage of this collection of useful resources, please visit teammadeapart.com/crisis, that is teammadeapart.com/crisis, to download your free Best Practices Guide. Today's special guest is none other than Danny Page. Danny is a former TV sports announcer turned entrepreneur with a focus clearly aimed on the success of remote work relationships. Danny was introduced to me as part of a consortium of remote work advocates and thought leaders behind the KeepTheWorldWorking campaign. KeepTheWorldWorking is a program developed by the Remote Work Association in conjunction with remote work experts worldwide and organizations like Team Made Apart with the sole focus of making tools and resources available to those who need them in this difficult time. Based in Barcelona, Spain, but amid the crisis calling in from his childhood home in Ventura, California, here to talk about the state of remote work and the Keep the World Working initiative is our special guest, Danny Page. Hey, Danny, how are you? Welcome to the show. We're so glad to have you here, and also nice meeting you for the first time.
Yeah, great to meet you as well, Ryan. I wish it were I wish it were under better circumstances, right?
Yeah, that's no joke, right?
We are living in this like incredibly uncertain and challenging time, and hoping, that all of us and everyone in our lives make it out of this. It is something we'll remember these days our whole lives. So I'm really and communication is so important. So I'm just really honored to be on here. Thanks, man.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, and just to give a little bit of background, I mean, this was kind of a last minute ask. Danny quickly raised his hand and was willing to come on. He and I have just sort of met each other recently as a result of working together on a collaborative thing that the Remote Work Association is putting on called Keep the World Working. I have, literally just met Danny via text in the last couple of days as he was fleeing his home away from home in Barcelona to get back to, I guess, higher ground here in Ventura. And so
now,
yeah.
Who knows?
So Danny, maybe give us a little bit of background on who you are, where you come from, and where you fit in this space, and then we'll kind of get into the rest.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ryan. I really appreciate it. So I grew up in Southern California, in Ventura, where I am now. I actually spent about a decade as a television sportscaster in the greater LA area. Transitioned to startups about 6 years ago. I worked for a couple of not so great startups, which you do. And then I worked for a startup that was really an amazing experience called Study Soup. I became vice president of operations there, and it was a completely distributed company. And Study Soup has a marketplace for university students to sell their study materials to their classmates. Awesome. And that was my first, it certainly wasn't my first experience working remotely. When I was 25, I started another company, clearly was pretty entrepreneurial at a young age, I guess. And we were all working remotely too. So that was 11 years ago now. But I mean, it's Study Soup. And I'm sure, Ryan, you had the same experience at some point along the way where remote work with the technology available to us, you see the magic that you can build in an organization, right? You see what happens when you hire great people and you trust them to create exceptional results. I mean, there's just something so special.
Yeah, no, it's true. I basically, just for your own background,
Please.
I began life, almost 20 years ago now, working out of the back of a tour bus. I used to road manage a bunch of musical acts out of Southern California.
What kind of acts? What kind of music?
Mostly rap, hip hop, sort of
Nice.
Reggae crossover stuff. Think like 311 types.
Tour manager is a tough job, man.
Yeah, it's a tough gig. But so what started for me, like in my sort of day job, I run a marketing agency. And but that began life sort of in the back of the tour bus as doing concert posters for different musical groups and things as we traveled around. And eventually it got to the point where I was doing so many, I had to start charging. And that was sort of the birth of the business. And so I come to remote work sort of from the freelance end of things, more
Cool.
as a contract worker who now, as a contractor, we still work for, Fortune 500 companies and all these guys. But we've always come to remote work from the other end. But still, to your point, able to leverage technology, even of the time, 15, 20 years ago at this point. I remember tethering to my old BlackBerry Pearl at like 14K internet and taking 20 minutes to send an email. And
I miss BBM, by the way. Like,
yeah,
BBM
right?
would be great. BBM would be, BlackBerry Messenger would be great for this time when everybody's locked at home.
Yeah, that is no joke. So cool. So I think that's really great. So, but it's funny how, worlds collide basically. So 3 months ago began sort of my foray into what I'm now calling remote work advocacy. I started doing work.
Good to have you.
Yeah, thanks. Started doing work in this space as a result of an article I had written. I had spent the prior year and a half writing articles on the importance of relationships in business and the sort of human factor, in this world of technology. And that evolved into an article that I wrote that was called Remote Not Alone. And it was sort of this idea of being a remote freelancer. Most people don't think of sort of that seedy underbelly, the anxiety, the depression, the isolationism, all these things. And so I felt compelled to write this piece about my experience as a freelancer. And in that article, I had used the phrase team made apart. And a business coach of mine who's a really savvy guy saw that and was like, dude, you should do something with this. So we grabbed that phrase, we grabbed the URL, and we went to work. And what we have now is advocacy and this podcast. And
awesome.
So it's fast moving for me. And all of a sudden, with all this coronavirus and the COVID-19 stuff, like I found myself thrust into a position where it's, what an opportunity to come in as a remote work advocate and really, try and help companies who now are, up to their eyeballs in a situation that's probably pretty difficult for most of them. And, lend my part, and so that's where I got involved with the Remote Work Association folks. And as that sort of trickled down, I mentioned to one of the people at Remote Work Association, Megan, that I had, we have a small office or a small team in Barcelona. And I, am very interested in Spain. Spain was the sort of impetus for all my articles on relationships, and the value of relationships were born after my first trip to Spain. And basically, that part of the world became really impactful for me. So she mentioned, oh, hey, I know this guy that's trying to put something together. You should talk to this guy. So, and here we are. So
that's kind of funny. There's definitely some worlds colliding here, right? So I didn't realize you had a team in Spain, but just to, because of the fact that, so I live in Spain, I have a Spanish passport through family heritage. But I mean, it's been a whirlwind week really, where my parents were about to come visit, and then we realized probably you guys shouldn't come visit. Then I realized I think I'm coming home, and now Spain's on total lockdown. But Megan, who you talked about, who I've been collaborating with in the remote space for a while, she and I grew up together here in Ventura. So it's probably the only reason like Ventura, California is mentioned in this is because of that pathway, having to leave Spain before the lockdown to be closer to family. But I didn't realize you had an office in Barcelona, and I knew you had a close connection to.
Yeah, we just have a small team over there. We have a couple art directors and stuff that live in a little city just south of Barcelona, actually called Castelldefels.
Yeah, sure. Castelldefels is brilliant.
Yeah, it's a great place, great beach, great everything. And so most of our team is actually located there just by happenstance. But for shorthand, we just call it Barcelona. And so I try and spend as much time as I possibly can. I've actually not been in a year and a half now, which is troubling to me. But for a while, I was going 4 or 5 times a year. And cool. Definite affinity for that. And basically the story of why I care so much about Spain is that we had the opportunity a few years ago to host a Spanish exchange teacher, a woman from Spain who came over to teach in a Spanish immersion program. that my children were in. She's now my partner in Barcelona. Her name's Anna. And Anna basically, spent the whole year while she was living with us, telling me about Spain and how great it was. And, she was missing all her friends and her family and all these things. And when she came over, she had transitioned into education as a career path because the economic situation in Spain was really rough and it was hard to find work. And teaching is kind of a safe career over there. It's a government gig and you get a pension and all this stuff. Totally. And so basically what happened is when she moved in, she had begun life as a graphic designer and moved into education for safety's sake. But while living with us and seeing what I did for a living, which was at the time working for an ad agency and then running one at night, we totally meshed on that. And she basically spent the last 6 months of her time here working with me every night from 7 to 2 in the morning. And then when she went home, we hired her full time. So the following,
she worked for you from 7 till 2 in the morning because you were building out your ad agency while you were working at another. Okay, got it. Correct. Now I understand.
Yep.
Now I understand. Right?
Yep. So, and I was working for an agency here in Salt Lake City at that time. Cool. So I would work all day, 8 to 6, and then come home and 7 to 2. We'd work on.
Yeah, that makes sense. Got it.
So yeah, but of course, all remote. We were working at night, so largely all our clients and everybody were remote. And then when she went home, we hired her full time from Barcelona, and we moved into the following March, I guess, was my first time going to Spain. And basically, I had spent my whole 20s kind of nose down, working for myself in my own office for clients all over the country. And in that period of time, that 10-year period, sort of all my friends started to fizzle off. They were having relationships and moving away. They were going to college. They were doing whatever. Meanwhile, I was just nose down working on my stuff, And so when I finally, I met Anna, I sort of pulled my head up a little bit and I became acutely aware of all the relationships and things that had gone by the wayside, and started to feel really bad about the decisions I'd made, because I thought that I had done all this in an effort to really provide for my family. But at the same time, I lost, so many people who were important to me, or at least had become really distant to them.
And you had made your decisions.
Yeah. And so I, after going over to Barcelona for the first time, I had this opportunity to see that country and was sort of embraced by friends and family and social circles. And, and at the time I spoke no Spanish at all. But I was brought into all these groups as if I had always known them. Right. It was just, and for whatever reason, it was wildly impactful to me. It was like this paradigm shift where I realized, wait a minute, there's another way to live, that's a little less selfish, a little less self-focused, and a little more giving to everybody else. Yeah.
I mean, I think we went through something similar. For me, it was about 5 years ago at this point. It was a slow process to ending up living there, but I went through the same thing.
And that's actually my
there's a different world that's out there. Cool.
Yeah. And and that was the thing, like I had grown up sort of in this American style, working, my butt off, from 6 at night or 6 in the morning to 2 in the morning and, killing myself for a decade. And it really wasn't until I got over there and sort of started to appreciate, I don't know. I mean, I always joke I could never be full Spaniard. I can only go about halfway. But they really appreciate their time with friends and family and people and, taking time to go to the beach. And, it's that old thing that, work to live, not live to work. And that's not always the case here in the States, or at least as I was coming up, it wasn't the case. It's becoming maybe a little more popular now, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a balance in Barcelona in the circles that I'm in. I think you actually do find a lot of like pretty hardworking, passionate people. I mean, you also find those who take like 2-hour lunches and have a glass of wine at lunch. Oh no, I do that too. But at the end of the day, I think that we are left with so much choice in this world, especially with the opportunity to work remotely, to work on your own terms, that more than ever, work doesn't have to feel like work, And I think a lot of the people that I'm surrounded with, a couple of whom you've already interacted with, like Daniel Juarez and Gustavo Franco and Nacho Rodriguez, the first two of whom live in Barcelona, like those guys work really hard, like me, but we still have plenty of time to have a good time, right? And we really are having a good time while we're working because we love what we're doing. So I think things are changing a little bit in Spain in that regard.
Yeah, well, and I think that's true. I think that, and it's not, I guess, I don't even know that when I have that conversation, like I don't think about it as being a negative thing that these people spend so much time out on the beach and doing these things, right? I just look at it as things that I would have never made time for in my own schedule. Like
Totally.
I just worked all weekend for an agency I'm consulting for. I've put in 36 hours in the last like 5 days for these guys, and so but agency culture will suck that out of you that way.
Right.
And
yeah,
so
I would say I do
that.
that. I do that too, probably once a month or something along those lines.
And that's
so
kind of enough. But like you said,
exactly.
I think the key word there is balance, right? It's a little bit of, you've got to sort of look out for yourself, your own health, all those things. And, but anyway, so that was sort of the introduction to Spain, the introduction of personal relationships. And at that point, we sort of started to transition our marketing agency into sort of a relationship-based marketing solution. And then also have begun writing and a bunch of sort of personal work on that stuff as well. So
awesome.
But that's where it all comes from.
Awesome. Brilliant.
So maybe let's transition a little bit into the sort of the state of things, right? I mean, of course, you can't go anywhere without, you throw a rock in any direction, you hit a COVID virus, somewhere. And so I wonder if we could talk a little bit about just sort of the state of what's happening, basically for people who don't understand, there is a, mass migration to remote work as a solution for, A, protecting employees and B, keeping business moving. Yep. But I wonder if you could sort of just talk about that a little bit, sort of where we are, where we're going, what you think might happen, and how we get started addressing this problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, let me just throw out how I've kind of pivoted away onto a separate role that's remote work centric. Away from scaling a distributed company in Steady Soup and kind of finish off my bio there. So I work as Chief Revenue Officer for Distribute Consulting, which is founded by Laurel Farrer, who also founded Remote Work Association, which Megan Dilley, who you mentioned, is the director for. So we work with enterprises and governments to build, a thriving remote ecosystem if it's on the government side or an NGO side, if it's for the enterprise to build the organization in terms of virtual health. I just wanted to kind of throw that in there. But
Laurel,
for me,
Laurel is also a guest on this
nice.
This season, so we have Laurel also.
Super.
So
but just to accelerate to things have changed so quickly. I just feel like in the last week we've all lived a year, and we've been remote work advocates for a long time. We've been passionate about remote work for a long time. And for this to be how remote work enters the conversation is just an absolute nightmare. It really is. I think about a few podcasts I've done. And one of the things I said was that remote work is going to hit its peak during a recession, because companies are going to have to decide between their office or their people. Well, I didn't expect it would happen in 2 weeks after my last interview, and I didn't expect it would happen.
For all this.
Yeah, I didn't expect it would happen in such a dramatic way. So there's different ways to look at this because different countries are dealing with this in different ways, and different countries are I should say dealing with COVID-19 at different times. So at the time of taping, Ryan, it's great that we started talking about Spain, because you're talking about a country where remote work is seen as punishment, right? Because you want to go out, you want to be social with your friends, you want to be out in the city, especially if you work in a city, and remote work is just depriving you of your brilliant social life, And we have a country where, and actually the percentage of knowledge workers who have never worked remotely is higher in Germany than Spain. Germany has the highest percentage in all of Europe where knowledge workers have not worked remotely. But as of this day, today is the largest number of people in the history of Spain that have ever worked remotely, probably 20, 50, 100 to 1, right?
Yeah.
Compared with what we've seen.
Yeah, I think I read something like nearly only something like 4% of the workforce in Spain has ever really worked remote.
Well, so today it's 100.
Yeah, things changed overnight.
Yeah, things changed overnight. And this week is going to be really interesting. We're with Keep the World Working, which is the project we built as a part of the Remote Work Association to do exactly that, to keep companies moving forward. Ryan, you've just been such a great addition on that, and we really appreciate your contributions. Man, we're going to see some interesting stuff from some of these Spanish companies, and we've just started to see some interest trickle in on the first day of help us figure this out. And I think Spain is just it's going to be, ironically for us, but it's going to be a huge barometer for how individuals will be able to work remotely during this crisis. Italy, Italy's a little bit different of a situation, and I can't talk as much to Italy, but I think it's going to be fascinating to see what unfolds in Spain. I mean, every day in this new world is interesting. Today, I mean, this week's going to be fascinating in Spain. The lockdown's supposed to last 15 days. I think it'll go longer. I mean, this is really the great Spanish remote work experiment. And the value that needs to be provided to me, Ryan, is not to companies necessarily. That's important, but individuals need that sense of belonging. You know, they need to feel like they're accomplishing something. And I hope that's what we see in the city that we love in Barcelona and across country.
Well, and that's what's so interesting about Spain in particular is that one of the big reasons for lack of this, remote work experience in the country is sort of cultural. It's not really their way. And so it's, to all of a sudden go from, 4% to 100%, or, ostensibly, maybe it's 90% or 95 or whatever it is. But to move everybody into sort of this remote work all of a sudden, when there was no sort of cultural warm-up period, I'm
Exactly.
concerned for how that shakes out. I think for a lot of people, especially folks that I've talked to and stuff, sort of on its face, this idea of, oh, you just take your laptop, you go work from home. It's a pretty American attitude about this, and,
Yes.
I mean, we live in a country that's, rife with technology, and not to say that everybody has a laptop, but I mean, it's not so simple, and it does sort of diminish the idea to just say that it's, oh yeah, just take your computer and now you're working from home today. It's I think there's so many nuanced things, all the way down to just the feels, right? How people are going to feel when they're stuck isolated at home. And, I just, God, I barely even know where to start on this stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lifestyle problem too. There's a lifestyle issue too in Europe, and I think working will make people feel better. It'll give them something to do with their day. There's no sports, there's no football being played. So people don't have anything to do, really, for the most part. So work will give them a feeling of belonging and a feeling of accomplishment, and I think that's going to be really, really important.
Maybe the thing that keeps them from going bonkers. I mean, they, out here in the States, we're pretty lucky. Most of us, outside of the few living in like New York City or something, have,
You have
some
space.
and you have things to do. Over there, flats are pretty tiny, and, it's not uncommon for the kids to be out kind of playing in the streets, and, all these things to be going on where you're not really spending that much time in your house. And now you're being asked to spend all your time in your house. And not only is the introduction of, working from home plus kids going to be a difficult transition in Spain, but it's just the fact of the matter is you want to go out in the street. Normally you go out in the street and have a beer or something in the evenings, and now you've got to just sit in your house.
Yeah, and France even more so than Spain. Like, your life is outside. You live outside, really, no matter the season, especially in a city like Paris, which, I mean, France, the same thing's coming in France shortly. They're in the same part of the curve where Spain was like 5 days ago. So,
right.
So we're anticipating really more than likely a shutdown across Europe, and it'll be interesting to see how the Spanish are able to, keep their companies productive and maintain some balance. And Spain is, for those of us that really believe in remote work, Spain is a place to significantly keep an eye on.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Well, and I also think that some of the learnings from there will obviously be usable in other parts of Europe, maybe other parts of the world even, because there are, I'm sure there are many countries that have sort of the same deficit of remote workers that they do. And, the learnings to how to overcome these problems semi-quickly, or at least, weather the storm without things going too sideways, I think will be useful, in a lot of places in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. A country that really was not too thrilled about this type of work is taking it on en masse today, actually. So something we'll keep an eye on, to say the least.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so let's talk a little bit about this Keep the World Working campaign, like the campaign itself, what the objectives are and what it's meant to do. So it was sort of spearheaded out of Spain in hopes of doing some things over there, but obviously the campaign could be much more global than that.
Yeah, that was just coincidence. That was just relevant. So as the date of this conversation in the U.S., I mean, everything changes, right? In the crisis that we're dealing with, but you have to think the majority of America will be locked down by the end of the week, probably, and that the remote work conversation will be more and more relevant as we progress through March. That's just my perspective. So I think that Keep the World Working was definitely, as a lot of the remote work conversations are, tailored to the US audience. But Ryan, as you said, there's just a lot of content out there. There are a lot of remote work guides. And what we're doing is aggregating all of that, a set of free resources. And also, because resources only take you so far, we want to provide free introductory consulting to any companies trying to make this transition. Like we will, and we've had such an amazing outpouring of support from this community. We will be able to give you someone for a 60-minute call with your C-level or HR team or whomever to kind of walk you through any questions you have about how to do this and how to execute it properly. And the other thing we're doing is creating content with on a daily basis, videos with some of the top thought leaders in the space to sort of provide real-time insights into what's happening and what can ideally be done. If we don't keep the world working, I mean, more relevant is like the supply chain, obviously. But if we don't keep the world working, like we face potential global collapse, right? And that's the biggest thing we want to prevent. This is a very serious situation. People are going to be sick. They're going to be hospitalized. People are going to die. But we only want in this crisis people dying because of the disease and not because of underlying social issues. And to me, that's why it's so important that we keep everybody pressing forward. People in their homes in the US next week, for example, people are getting up, they're taking a shower, they're having their breakfast, and they're getting to work. And I think it's essential. It's essential. Just keep us moving forward, man.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really great thing, and I'm thrilled to be involved with it. I wonder.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you. Honestly.
What do you? I mean, tell me if this is a direction you want to go or not. Basically, yeah. I was thinking maybe we could start. Share a few practical bits here on this show and talk a little bit about how people can maybe begin some of these transitions, maybe as it pertains to working with, either the Remote Work Association getting involved or the Keep the World Working campaign if you need free advice. But can we talk more generally about like maybe how co-located companies can begin transitioning? There's things like trust and truth and transparency and things like these that, need to be part of a workforce anyway. And obviously, if you had more time to work all this out, that would be awesome. But do you have any maybe thoughts on how this rapid transition, understanding that it's not going to be perfect, how we could maybe start baby stepping into it, given the urgency of this transition?
Yeah, I have a model that I use for smaller companies called the Rule of Five, right? That I developed. And number 3 is the three TRs: trust, truth, and transparency. Maybe you did do your homework before this conversation.
Just a little.
But I think you have to flip. I think you have to flip that model and prioritize that structure is built for like a change management process, right? And the order of orientation, if you will, starts with only results matter, building a results-centric structure, then superb communication practices, the three TRs, people, process, tools is number 4. First of all, tools has to become number 1, right? Like you have to have the proper tools. And I think that's super easy to find out what those tools are. Mm-hmm. To me, one of the most important things is creating a communication structure, a comm structure, with a set of expectations that goes along with it. So I think this would be really simple in that if you're sent an email, you have to respond to the email in 24 hours. If you're sent a Slack message, you have to respond this just depends on company culture, right? You have to respond in 1 hour. If you're sent a iMessage, WhatsApp, SMS, you have to respond within 10 minutes. And if I call you, you have to pick up the phone. Because one of the things that happens is the perception just starts to run wild of, well, I can't see them working. Of course, it's super cliched. I can't see them working. How do I know they're working? I can't reach them. And someone might be working, but they get a Slack message and didn't see it. And a company didn't set up that communication structure, which included, Ryan, the highly urgent communication component. And that's just going to make everybody feel better. So number 1 is sort out your tools. Number 2 is create that structure of, I need to get a hold of you right now. How do I do that? Right? It's going to make everybody feel more relaxed, and it's going to allow us to avoid disruptions and allow us to maintain trust in the system. So those would be like the first two keys, don't you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. It's really interesting. So because just recently, maybe in the last month or so, I've started coaching and consulting again for an agency that I worked for. Actually, the agency that moved me to Utah 7 years ago now.
Okay.
And so we've always stayed in communication, and they've got a big global insurance company that they do work for, that they bring me in every so often to sort of consult on different pieces of that business. And so just recently, I started doing that again, sort of in the last month or so. And we've been watching the situation sort of deteriorate. And just last Friday, they said, okay, we're done. Everybody's done. Everybody work from home now. Now they have a technological advantage in that it's an ad agency. Everybody does have a laptop. Everybody is used to using electronic communication channels. But I've already started to notice a total disruption of communication that, I think for a lot of them, they don't realize how much they actually just bump into each other and talk about things. And
Right.
now those conversations aren't happening, and
Right.
so right now we're in the process of trying to leverage some of my newfound knowledge in remote workspace to try and build out some communication profiles and things like that in their Slack channels. And, they don't, drop in a water cooler and set up, per project discussions and some things like this that I can use to help sort of leverage this communication, because there are so many gazillions of moving parts, but they're used to just meeting in person, or they're used to doing whatever. And it's not that way anymore.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I just talked to a CEO right before this conversation, CEO of a company I consult. And like, if you're in a remote company, you know what? Some things that I really don't love doing that a lot of companies do are like, yeah, let's do the virtual happy hour. Let's do the virtual coffee. And I know a lot of like people ops directors will say they love that. I don't. I think it's like not really a lot of fun. But what the CEO told me was, he's like, man, we had like a virtual happy hour with like, my other he lives in the Bay Area, my other Bay Area friends that are CEOs. And it was amazing because right now we're all craving human contact. So this is the perfect time to set up those like, hey, this is everybody's time for a bocadillo break. It's Spanish, sandwich in Spanish.
Yeah.
And get everybody together in a Zoom room. And whereas if it was a remote company doing that every day, it would be like, really, are we doing this again? But like, that's because people would be working in co-work spaces and going out for happy hour, like real happy hours with their local friends. But right now, those social meetings are super, super effective. And I would highly recommend having those as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's really an interesting idea. I mean, even as sort of an indicator for other things, right? I mean, like you mentioned, in a company that already has experience working remote, and in the case of this ad agency, for example, I mean, they use freelancers and things all the time. Like, I mean, they're used to communicating electronically, although there's definitely room to improve in those relationships. But this human connection component, and I guess that's kind of the point I was trying to make with these guys. They don't realize how often they bump into each other. They're kind of getting their social jollies out, by walking around and being able to sort of bump into somebody somewhere and have a quick conversation or whatever.
Right.
And now it's going to have to be much more purposeful, and it may have to be a virtual coffee thing because we can't actually just go to Starbucks and meet. And so it may get pretty virtual pretty fast. And so, so I think that's an interesting observation.
Yeah, we are in we're in an interesting time, and it's one of the big things we learned from Italy is, and I don't know if you're experiencing this too. I don't know like the level of lockdown coming back from Spain. Like I have zero symptoms, but I self-quarantined. My parents are over 65, so I wasn't going to be with them. I'm by myself in my sister's apartment. She lives in Ventura as well. She's staying with them. They like knock on the door and drop off food and leave it outside. And okay, I'll see you guys in 11 days. But one of the things that we're learning from Italy is we all, a lot of times we'll say we have, I'm an extremely social person. We have like close friends, super close friends, maybe friends from childhood, especially with me living across the world, but we don't necessarily have like phone conversations all the time, and everybody is just talking to each other all day long now, and like, that's what I would encourage a lot of people to do is like, pick up the phone and call your friend from college because they're available, they're around, and whatever you can do for all of us to be able to manage this better, create that social connection, or just have a virtual coffee with one of your colleagues that you haven't connected with enough. Like we're going to need it, Ryan. We need it badly right now.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, I think whether you're a remote worker or just a human being, there is solace in instability, right? I mean, if you tune into the news, the world is on fire, and everything's being made 10% worse. A horrible situation is being made worse, and by the sort of sensationalist approach and all this stuff, and just lack of information and things like that. And so people are scared, people are nervous, and even if you are being forced to work remote, like that's such a sudden change to this whole dynamic that we're used to, this sort of comfort that we get.
And one that's hard for us to see, right? Yeah. One that's hard for us to see. Like we've been doing this for years. Can you imagine how scary this is for people that are doing it for the first time?
Yeah, for sure. And so I think to your point about these virtual coffee breaks, or just reaching out to old friends or whatever, like I think that in terms of sort of, national, global, personal well-being and sort of mental health, it makes perfect sense to be making these conversations with people who you've known for a long time, right? I mean, that's stability. That's a way for you to reach out and grab onto something that's stable and not moving. Because right now we're having a really hard time finding that.
Yeah, absolutely. The tying up the social component and keeping people sane is something important. I'd say if we were getting into like the next level of what to advise companies on, and this would be if we were going through like the full change management process, but as much as possible, focus on, it's something I call the time equals output fallacy, right? Like it's just not true that the amount of time someone puts in is equal to their, corresponds to the output and what they create. This isn't a factory. Like we're not machines that are just running at a certain percentage and that equals our output. I would encourage managers to, as much as possible. Oh, it's raining. Nice. That's what we say in California when it rains.
When it rains. I would encourage off the streets.
Yeah. I would encourage managers as much as possible to give your direct reports a series of results on Mondays, check in with them Wednesdays, and have them report back to you what they completed on Fridays. Because as much as possible, people, we need to have the understanding that people are not going to be working 8 hours a day, especially those with children, right? So those that have kids at home suddenly are mom and dad all day while they're working. And by creating a results-centric structure, it allows people to work really hard in a shorter period of time. They'll probably be more focused than they've ever been because they know they don't have to stay all day, Ryan. And then they can go be with their families, or they can move around their availability to be with their families. Now it's different if you're in like a customer support role or something, but I think that's what managers need to do is get your people on a result structure.
Yeah, no, I think that makes perfect sense. And I actually think it'll be one of the interesting things, the fallout of this whole deal, when it is time for people to go back to work and they've been accomplishing a lot more in a lot less time. What do managers do then? Do they make a decision to, God, do we go remote all the time? Do we, how is this going to change? I'm sure there will be plenty of good experiences and bad experiences out there, largely probably related to the management and everything else. But I mean, for people that this works really well for, who see some of the, sort of the positive traits or positive characteristics of remote work that are always being bandied about, the efficiency improvements and some of these other statistics that kind of get, handed out a lot from the sort of the remote work advocacy crowd. When they start to see some of those things, what work looks like may never be the same. Like it could actually be changing everything. It'll be really interesting to see how it all shakes out.
Yeah, I mean, we really don't know what that's going to look like. The thing that we do know is that recessions change a lot surrounding how economies are structured, and this isn't just a global pandemic. It is, probably going to end up being the third largest, financial downturn in the last 100 years, right? I mean, this should probably outpace 2008 even with where we're headed right now. Mm-hmm. And you're right. Something's going to change. We have no idea what's going to change. We just need to survive here. Yeah. But something is going to change. And I think the biggest thing the remote work community can do is turn around and just say, how can I help? And that's what we're trying to do with Keep the World Working, right? Is just aggregate as much knowledge as possible so that companies can make this transition and feel whole.
Yeah, no, I think that's really great. Well, so as we're starting to get to, the back half of this show, let's maybe talk a little bit about, I guess what one could expect or what the process might be like if I was going to reach out to the Keep the World Working folks. And
Yep.
I am interested in doing this. Like, what kinds of problems should I be having that I need addressed versus just, I have a problem or the office is on fire. Like, what are the types of questions and things like that you feel make sense for people to come engage with us for? And then, how do you think that process is going to shake out?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons why I like the fact that we have consultants available and we can schedule these 60-minute sessions is like, I think these, whether it's company executive, a C-level or operations manager, they just need someone to talk to that's going to remind them everything's going to be okay, and that's why I think those conversations would be great. At the same time, if we want to keep it a little bit more operational, first is a tools analysis, making sure you have the right tools in place, ensuring that the meeting structure can go completely digital, creating that communication pattern. And, we provide guidelines for our consultants, but at the same time, like, they are on our consultant list because they've been successful in building a remote organization. So in a lot of ways, they'll leverage their own strategy, and we're fine with that. Right.
Sure. Well, and every situation will be different, right? I mean,
right,
so
exactly.
It makes perfect sense. And I mean, there's a broad range of experts that you guys have managed to cobble together, but at the same time, I mean, there may be, extraneous companies or people that do different things that, don't have a direct model. Like one of the more challenging ones that I've been approached with recently is a company that works largely in the insurance industry. They're brokers and people like that. But for data security and other things like that, they basically have a desktop machine tethered to an office that now they can't go to.
That's
and their data is not available online. They don't have gear, and so this is one that, and they're a really large company. They're, distributed in every state, every state in the union. And I think that they are, really grasping at straws with what to do. Like, what portion of their work can they take online if they don't have their data, if they don't have their information, if they don't have access to systems? How are they supposed to keep working? And so I think it's, for us, it's been really challenging to try and advise them, because it does require a shift. It's going to be probably usage of a lot of personal equipment, things like that.
Yeah.
What does that mean for the data security and everything else? And so I mean, I think it's quite a mess. So.
Yeah, I mean, endpoint management is really important right now for companies like VMware. There's a lot for them to do to ensure that if people are bringing their own device, they are using their own devices in a security-centric way. So, I don't think I did a good job answering your question, but you would, a company that needs help can log on to keeptheworldworking.org or remoteworkassociation.com/advocacy. And sign up for help. Basically, we'll get back to you with a resource list or the opportunity to book a call with one of our consultants. Pretty straightforward in that regard. And yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great. So one other component of the Keep the World Working campaign is this idea of sort of a virtual relief kit, this amalgamation of products and services and tools that have sort of been assembled. And it sounds like there's a little bit of sort of like an application process or a nomination process for people in need who need tools and equipment so that they can be effective remote workers. Do you know anything about that, or can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, Megan's going to be the better resource on the emergency supply kit. But what I can tell you is that we've just had some amazing contributions from a lot of companies that want to provide free software or provide free hardware, whether it's a part of our, a part of the 50 virtual supply kits, like Owl Labs, for example, is including 50 of their little owls in those. Logitech as well is involved. Of course, we'll make people aware that Microsoft Teams is free for 6 months. You have to love what Loom is doing, where Loom Premium is now free to K-12 educators for life, right? If you sign up now during the crisis. So, we've aggregated, and it's hard for me to track because I think we have like 15 different companies that are giving away free, that are giving away free software specifically as part of this. But I would, that's a great place for companies to start too, right? Is with the emergency supply kit. You can apply for we have 50 of the like premium version, which has hardware, as I mentioned, like Owl Labs, Logitech, so on and so forth. But I would, make sure to take a look at that and
Yeah. So I think that's great. So, I mean, as you mentioned, it's remoteworkassociation.com/advocacy. You can go there. You can do two things. You can contribute as an advocate for one. So if you happen to be in the remote work space, you're interested in getting involved and want to help, there's a way to do that at that site. You can also learn as a remote employer. There's some resources, some Q&A sessions. There are being roundtables and things like that set up for, sort of Q&A sessions. And then also, as you mentioned, the sort of direct, relationship with a consultant or somebody who can help you answer some questions or field, conundrums that are springing up all over the place right now.
Fielding conundrums. That's what we do.
That's the gig. So cool. All right. Well, I guess that's kind of it. I mean, this was sort of an impromptu conversation. I really just wanted to spread the word about Keep the World Working and sort of your involvement in all that. And then also sort of the Remote Work Association and the good work they're doing right now in this crisis to help out basically everybody in need. Anything else you'd like to touch on or you think would be important as a sort of takeaway for people?
No, not really. Just be positive, be good to people. Like, we're going to get through this, be gracious and stay inside, do not go outside. That is okay. Go for a little walk or something like that. But social distancing is a phrase we didn't know 3 weeks ago. And now it's what everybody has to do. If we're going to get through this, we have to realize how fragile these incredible lives we live in the modern world are. And we really have to come together to defeat this thing. And it might take a couple weeks, it might take a couple years, but let's be ready to do this together.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's about as good as it could get. So, Danny, any other spots where people can learn more about you or get in touch online? Just the same or anywhere else?
Yeah, I guess I'd say you could find me on LinkedIn, Danny Page. The only reason I point you there is to follow the daily content and interviews we'll be doing. Looking at this week alone, we'll have Nasser Rodriguez, Nomad City, Daniel Juarez, who I mentioned before. We'll have Tara Vazdani, the founder of Remote Law Canada. We'll have Marcus Vermouth, who's the mobile team lead at Buffer. I mean, we're going to have a lot of the interesting minds in remote work getting together and talking on short video streams about what's going on and providing tips to companies just like we're doing here. So just follow me on LinkedIn and I'll be able to, you'll be able to see those videos daily.
Cool. All right. That's perfect, Danny. Well, thank you so much. I'm so glad to have had you on here and pleasure to meet you, albeit virtually. Maybe we'll do it in Barcelona sometime when it's a little more safe to do so.
One of these days. Thanks so much.
Cool, man. All right. Take care.
I don't owe you anything. I don't know you.